Well, welcome everybody. Today is August 11th, 2021. My name is Dr. Carrie Arnold. I am the Program Director for Evidence-Based Coaching here at Fielding Graduate University, and I am delighted to see all of you here participating in a very important and interesting topic. Veena Sharma is a thought leader on vertical development. She's the founding president of Vertical Development Academy. She did a series, this is a two-part series. She did a webinar for us last month that's recorded and on the Fielding website. And we are delighted to have her back today, talking about how we can tailor our coaching to our clients' level of maturity. I'm very excited to be participating and listening in. For coaches who are joining, if you are interested in continuing education units to maintain your credential, this is eligible for an ICF CEU. You just need to be present for the entire live session, and I will be putting a link to an evaluation in chat towards the end of the session, and you'll want to complete that within 24 hours. And this is being recorded. So for those of you who maybe need to drop off before the end, just know that it's available. She will not be sharing her slide deck, but because it's going to be recorded, you'll have access to come back at any time and listen. And last, just one more thing, we offer these opportunities monthly. Fielding Graduate University wants to make great content available to the coaching community in a way that's accessible. So if you're interested in learning more about the Enneagram, on September 29th, one of our alumni at Fielding, Dr. Carl Hebenstreet, will be doing a session on that, 11 a.m. Pacific. So you might want to hold that date. I'll put a link in the chat for that as well. So without further ado, Veena, I'm going to turn it straight over to you. I know you have some great content to share with us. And again, welcome everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Carrie, and thanks to Fielding for hosting me. And thank you all for showing up. I see familiar faces, friends from the last session. We also have one of our certified coaches here, Troy, welcome. And some of you have seen this before and you've come again. So I hope you get a new layer of appreciation, even though it may be a repeat for you. So as I begin, I just want to check in with you about your familiarity with the idea of vertical developments. Are you familiar with the models out there? What model are you familiar with? What's your level of familiarity? I'd love to hear so I could just get a sense of just your appreciation so far. And if you have any specific questions or any burning question, if you just put it in the chat box, that just helps me to keep it at the back of my mind so that I can integrate it as I'm sharing with you some of the overview as well as some detail. And at the end of the session, cross my fingers, I will do this on time and I won't be behind, and we'll have a few minutes also to have a little dialogue. And so you can ask questions, and I will also stay another 5-10 minutes at the end for those who want to stay. So yeah, if you have any questions or something that is a high level inquiry into development and specifically adult development, then that would be great. Yeah, many of you I can see. How do you ensure you aren't missed? Great question. So somebody who's highly familiar, this is Jimmy. How do you ensure you aren't misdiagnosing your client stage of development? So I will address that as we go along. And I would just say that we don't diagnose. It's just an assumption we make. We don't stage people, but I'm, I think, running ahead of myself since I'm getting excited by your questions. Okay, so I know, Wheaton, you've come again and again, so thank you for showing up. Okay, so some of you are familiar with the polarity session because you were here last, but not quite the adult development, so I will be making that link. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and as soon as you see my screen clearly, I would love if you can just give me a thumbs up that that you can see it fine. Okay, great, thank you. So the focus of today's session is tailoring coaching to stage of maturity. Now, all of you are either experienced coaches or practicing coaches or credentialed coaches or in a coaching program or interested in coaching. And this framework of looking at how adults develop throughout their lifespan and understanding how research has shown us that there are these stations all adults go through, these waves of development or these stages of development. That is an important framework to hold to support how we coach others and also to see how we develop. So I think it's a significant lens. It's, I would say it's still new in the arena, even though there's a lot of interest and more even organizations are getting interested. So in order to even understand tailoring coaching, first we have to understand what do we mean by stage of maturity. So we're going to do a little bit of that. And let me share with you what my agenda is for us today. So the first is reflecting on and appreciating the maturity scale. So you're going to do a little exercise, and it's really important that you get a feel for a taste for stages, because it's very easy for this to be at the level of concept, at the level of idea, and it can be abstract. And there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of content. So I'd love to have you have a taste of this. So we'll do a reflection, and then I'll give you a brief background to adult development. I'll give you an overview. We'll talk a bit about polarities and maturity, because last time we introduced the understanding of how we're all navigating these tensions and interdependent polarities. And how does that relate to maturity? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll end with, what does a maturity coach offer to a client? So that may be interesting for you. And then we'll do a Q&A. So that's my agenda. Again, as I'm speaking, please, if you have any questions, I'll be checking the chat box. Since we have a largish group, we won't be taking questions in between. So I apologize that it's going to be initially one way after we do the reflection. And then I look forward to the dialogue. Okay, so we're going to start with this exercise. So if you please grab a pen and paper, if you have something, or open up, if you're in front of your computer or your iPad, just open up a notes page or just a blank page so that you have something to write on, because you won't be able to hold everything in your head. So this is the topic. How do leaders perceive feedback, or how does anyone perceive feedback? When you give someone feedback, how do they receive it? How they respond to feedback can be an indicator of how they see themselves and how they see other people, and what ideas do they have about life and experience. So what I'm going to share with you is 7 different ways that people respond to feedback. And here they are. And you can see that there are letters next to each of these responses. What I want you to do is rank order these in terms of from 1 to 7. So you see a little empty box there. So if you have a piece of paper, just write down A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you'll have empty space next to the letters where you'll write the numbers. So you'll have to rank order these responses from 1 to 7, where 1 is the least mature. However you might define maturity, but you'll get a lot of clues from the content here. Where 1 is the least mature and 7 is the most mature. What would be the most expansive, enlightened way of responding to feedback? And what would be the most contracted, limited way of responding to feedback, if you will? Okay, so you have maybe 2 to 3 minutes. Rank order 1 to 7. 1 is the lowest in terms of rank order. 7 is the highest. Okay, so I'm just going to put my timer for a couple minutes. Somebody asked a question. Force ranking, each one has a 1 to each. No, each one doesn't have a 1 to 7. You have to give one number to one response. If it's not very mature, you would put it as a 1 or a 2. If it's very mature, you would put it as 6 or a 7 and then in between. So just rank order these. Give you another minute, and if you finished, you can just put a thumbs up in the chat message or say yes, so that I have a sense that okay, 30 seconds. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the next slide is show you the numbers with the ranking, and I'd like you to check your response and see where were you off and what did you get right. And often people will just switch a couple of them, but mostly it's so interesting that most people have a good idea about what maturity is all about and what is a more mature response in compared to less mature. So if you have switched something or you didn't get something right, or you had a question, I'd like you to put it in the chat box so that I can just maybe refer to a couple. Okay, E and F switch. So this is Monse, E and F. Okay, A and F. So A and F are closer. A and F are 4 and 5, if you see. So let's look at that. If you look at A, when people get feedback at this stage, they welcome the feedback. And you can see there are earlier ones where they don't even welcome feedback. They see it as an attack, or they see it as disapproval, or they take it personally, which you can see is experience as an attack is 1, seeing feedback as disapproval is 2, taking it personally is 3. So 4 itself is a huge leap, where for the first time, you realize that when somebody gives you feedback, that there might be something to it, that they might actually be right. So they welcome feedback, but more importantly, they welcome feedback in order to improve themselves, to achieve their goals, and they are committed to change what needs to be changed, and they really believe that they can actually control it. There's a sense of, I can reinvent myself, I can change myself, I can grow, I can develop. That's in number 4. If you look at number 5, they also welcome feedback, but there's a difference. They welcome feedback as necessary to uncover hidden aspects of their own behavior. So what does that mean? That means they realize that there are aspects of themselves that they can't yet see. And so when you give me feedback, it means you're seeing something that I can't see, and I welcome that. So I hope you can see that that is a new order of understanding, a new appreciation, new insights about oneself and one's what one knows about oneself, one's level of awareness. And at number 5, they also acknowledge their own conditioning. So they recognize that they've been, through their life experiences, they've been acculturated in certain ways. They have patterns of behavior that are unconscious. So where number 4, there's the belief that I can change things and I can control it. At 4, 5, I realize that there are things I'm not even aware of that I can't control. So I hope you can see there's a huge difference between 4 and 5, and how 5 is more advanced in their understanding. So I'm just checking with you, Monse, since this was yours, that you got that difference. And somebody switched D and F, which is 5 and 6. So now that we've talked about 4 and 5, you look at number 6. So you can see now they invite feedback for growth. So it's not just welcoming feedback. Why would you invite feedback? It's because you realize that that is the way we all grow, because we are all interdependent with our environment and we're products of our environment. And so I may not pick up things, so I need to get more feedback so that I can get a better sense of how I am even responding to life. And they can own one's own contribution. I think there's a typo there, sorry about that. They can own one's own contribution to others' experience. So where early, if you give me feedback, I'll just think that's not true. I'm not like that. But here at this stage, even if I don't quite agree with you, I can realize that I must have done something that caused you to feel that or think that. So what's my part in it? So I have a contribution in that, even though I may not fully agree with the feedback that you're giving me. And at this stage, conflict is seen as an inevitable aspect of relationships. So it's not a problem. Getting feedback is actually a good thing. It's necessary. It's part of relationships, and I invite it. So I hope you can hear this so much more spaciousness to look at multiple perspectives in connection with giving feedback. So if you are getting a sense of this, please do type in the chat box so I get a sense that you are tracking with me. What I'd like you to do now, I'm going to take you to the next slide, is show it to you in sequence. And just take a moment to read it from the bottom to the top, and you begin to sense the sequence. And I guess you could even get in touch with people that you've known in your life that have responded in different ways. Just read it slowly from the bottom to the top and begin to see, get a sense of this expanded sense, more possibilities, more complexity, more perspectives, willingness to look at oneself, not defended, not contracted, not trying to fit into somebody else's idea, not dismissive, more inclusive. Each of these responses represents a worldview of development, and we all are going through these stages of development, and that is the first distinction we make in development. So we say there are two kinds of development. There's horizontal development, where we're growing and learning, but when we're growing horizontally, we're learning more skills, we're getting more information, we're able to transfer something from one area to the other. We're continuing to grow, and we have more clarity, we have more to offer, but we don't necessarily shift the way we see the world. We don't necessarily challenge the fundamental assumptions we make about ourselves and other people. Whereas vertical development is different. Vertical development is where we continue to grow, but there comes a time, and you can think about this yourself. Think about maybe 15 years ago. It's easier to think about it in larger arcs of time, but this is also happening in shorter arcs of time. But think about it, 15 years ago, you are not who you were today. You're different in very fundamental ways. And I'm sure you've had experiences in your life where you've looked back and asked yourself, what was I thinking? Why did I even do that? Or why did I assume certain things? So stages of development means you come into, through life experience, through being challenged, you have a sense of what is, but that actually is not what your experience is anymore. You have an idea of what is reality, but your experience is telling you something different. And you then have to come up with a new explanation for what is going on. I mean, think about COVID. It's been so confounding. We have no idea when it hit us what is going on. And the way we responded to COVID would reflect how we see what is going on. So this is a new framework that only in the last 45 years of research has it been codified, that all human beings go through these stages of development. And again, I'm sure you can relate. You take up a new job and you have an idea of what kind of a leader you're going to be, or you become a coach and you've been certified and you're now meeting clients and you have a good idea of what it means to coach somebody. And then 10 clients along the way, you realize, oh my God, I had no idea that this is what it involves. Because reality will teach you that your ideas about reality are not adequate to map everything that is happening, the reality of your client's world and of your world and what you're bringing in and what your client is standing on. So vertical development rests on what we call meaning making, that all human beings, we make meaning and we create these maps of reality. And then as we go through experience, we have to keep adjusting these maps. We have to keep coming up with new ways of understanding what is going on. So leadership maturity is about the level of perspective you can take. And as you just saw in the various ways you can respond to feedback, a mature leader would respond to feedback in some of the more mature ways that you saw. So leadership maturity is based on adult development theory, and specifically, we call it adult ego development theory. So many of you are familiar with Keegan's theory, with Terry O'Fallon's theory and spiral dynamics. And the thing that distinguishes this framework is that it rests on the construct of the ego. It rests on a ego development theory based on 45 years of research. And the other thing is that this is also empirically based, which means it was derived from the data. It wasn't a theory that was created from observation and then research to validate. I think that's an important distinction. So what is the ego? We need to, if we're using the word ego, then it's our responsibility to define it, because ego is a very big word and it has so many associations and connotations, and we can use it very loosely. So the ego is that part of ourselves that's trying to make meaning. We're trying to understand what's going on. And it has two functions. The first function is the process of meaning making. So what the ego does is takes into account everything that's going on, digests it, and then processes that experience. In fact, I think it's not even accurate to call it the ego. I think we should call it egoing, because it's a process. We're making sense of everything. And once we make sense of everything, then we create a story. We create a story about what's going on, and we create a story about who we are. So we create an image of who we are based on our life experiences, and we give that an identity. And as our meaning making evolves, remember I said, when you start off coaching, you have an idea, and then 10 clients later, 10 years later, you realize, now I think I understand what coaching means. So as that meaning making evolves, there is a new story about what does coaching mean? What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be a parent? What does it mean to be a spouse? What does it mean to be a human being? And so through an examinations of thousands of these stories that people tell about themselves, there is an observable pattern that can be seen based on research originally done by Jane Lovinger in the 60s, and then built on by Dr. Suzanne Cook-Greuter, who is my colleague. There was an observation of this pattern, and they saw that so many people said exactly the same thing. And then there's a whole other group of people who said something completely different, but they were far more inclusive of other aspects or other dimensions. And so as you yourself ranked later stages, all of these stories were ranked, and these later stages of maturity began to get crystallized, began to get defined. And there are 8 stages of development that are recognizable. Not just recognizable, they can be measured. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about both. So one can summarize vertical development using this metaphor of the ladder. So the ladder is like the stages of development. Each rung represents a stage. The climber is the ego, that part of ourselves that's trying to make meaning and trying to come up with ways of understanding what is going on. And then the view is from each rung, the view is different. Like the person who takes feedback and is defensive and sees us as an attack, the view of their world is very different from the person who invites feedback because they see conflict as part of life. Very, very different. And then we have the climbing. So what is this process of climbing? How do we come upon new perspectives? And what are some of the conditions necessary to support that movement? So you have the ladder, the climber, the view, and the climbing that sort of summarizes this whole idea of vertical development. And now we have the benefit of having a facilitator. So with adequate understanding of the stages of development, you can facilitate your own vertical development. If you understand where you are, where you've come from, and what's next for you, you can begin to interpret your emerging day-to-day experience and reality from a stage perspective and begin to see what would it be like to step into what's the next stage perspective. And now you can have the coach as a facilitator. You can actually be trained as a coach to understand these stages and support the client, or you can get a coach to support you. If you're not as familiar, then you can have somebody trained to support you in your development. And I think this is just fantastic because for maybe up until, I would say at least 20 years ago, this framework, the research was simply not available for you and me. It was strictly meant for research, and Jane Lovinger didn't allow it to be used outside academic contexts. And now we have the gift and the benefit of the research, of the measurement instrument, and the framework. So this is a fabulous support for coaches who are really interested in understanding what does development even mean. A lot of organizations spend billions of dollars on developing their leaders, but they cannot answer this question: how developed are your leaders? And you as a coach, if you're meeting a client, how would you answer that question? How developed is my client? So this gives us a framework. It gives us a way to understand and answer that question. So we talked about the climbing. In our work, we also identify what are called developmental movements. Since we don't have too much time, I'm not going to go into detail, but you can imagine that somebody who is just moving from one rung to the next, has left the previous stage, but hasn't yet fully landed at the next stage, they would be in transition. Some people may have just stepped into a new stage, so their movement is and learning is all about integration. Sorry, it's all about consolidation. How do I consolidate? How do I continue this new perspective that I've come into? How does that carry into other parts of my life? And integration is when you fall back. You realize, as you all have had this experience of meeting an old friend or going to your parents' place during holidays, and you realize that you reacted like you did when you were 15. And you know that, and you still wonder, how did I, there I go again. So that is fallback when you get triggered and you fall back into an earlier way of meaning making. So why is this important? As a coach, how I coach someone who's in transition is different from how I would coach somebody who's in consolidation, is different to how I might coach somebody who needs to integrate some earlier aspects of their stage. And so noticing and identifying these movements can then be another, I would say, conceptual framework through which the coach can begin to see their client and be even more supportive to the client. So there are some tenets of vertical development. Everybody starts at the beginning. Nobody is born at a later stage. And development is unidirectional. So once you get to the later stage, that capacity is available to you. You don't then develop backward. You may fall back, but you're aware that this was a reaction from, being triggered or from an earlier sense of being, that there's a part of you that hasn't quite grown up yet. The sequence of development is invariant also. You can't skip a stage. You can't jump from stage 2 to stage 5. Of course, different people have different paces. Some people can move faster, some can move slower, and that's dependent on so many different variables. But you can't actually skip a stage. And if you do move, let's say there's a major life experience, you've lost a dear one and you've never experienced death before, and it can actually it can be transformative. But if you get catapulted like that and transformed into a new stage, then there is work to be done in integrating that and embodying that. So even if you have a quick jump into the next stage, there is more growth and integration needed. And of course, later stages can understand earlier, but not vice versa. Somebody who has not yet seen that worldview at a later stage can't understand it. And they're likely to interpret the later stage from their point of view. So somebody at a later stage who's far more expansive and more loose and doesn't break up the world into this or that and either or, and are able to interested in more perspectives, somebody at an earlier stage can see them as being wishy-washy. Oh, they don't know their mind, or they're just being spineless. So these are the nuances that I think are important to just take into account. And the stage of their maturity stage or their center of gravity is the automatic way in which they respond to life situations. So what does that mean? It means that there are parts of me that when I'm supported, when I'm inspired, I probably can step into a greater perspective. But on a day-to-day basis, automatically, the way I respond to my family or to just things that come by me every day, I might react slightly differently. And when we look at center of gravity, when we use the measurement that we use, we're really looking at that automatic response, because that is so revealing, and that helps me see where I need to work on. Of course, we believe developmental potential is innate in every human being, and transformative experiences and consistent support can facilitate the maturity process, but cannot guarantee it. And that's why I like to say that stage development is not a goal. It's an outcome. It's an outcome of internal and external circumstances conspiring to support the life in you that's evolving. And individuals develop in different ways and in very unique ways. I might have 4 people who've taken the assessment and all 4 of them show up at the same stage of development, but how I coach each one is going to be different, because each one of them has had a unique pathway. And each one of them would have different things to integrate and different aspects to explore in terms of the next stage. And so I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. Now, later is not necessarily better. So this is not a hierarchical model that is used to label people and to push people up and then to disrespect people by saying, oh, they are not mature. And harm can be done, and it has happened. And so this is something that we hold really with great care and concern, that we don't see later as better. It's a matter of fit. It's not an absolute. It depends on your environment. Does it fit in with your internal and external circumstances? And yet it's a very critical aspect of growth in any human being. And I can even put it this way: not paying attention to the stage of development would be a big miss. It's not the only thing to be paid attention to. There are so many other considerations in supporting people when you do your coaching. So here is the leadership maturity framework. You can see there are 8 stages of development. And there are some numbers here that tell you what research says are, is the distribution. So you can see there's this midline. The left side, you have 4 stages. The right side, you have 4. The left side are the conventional stages. The right side are the post-conventional stages. So there is this midpoint is a big milestone in development. And you can see 75 to 85% of the general population falls to the left of the arc. And only 15 to 20% actually make that shift. More and more is happening, especially as we get more and more self-selected people coming into the work. That percentage is much higher. But in the general population, you can see that post-conventional development is the next big milestone. And so I really believe that a lot of coaching right now needs to be positioned to support people from moving from conventional to the first post-conventional stage. Each stage of development is a constellation of different, I would say, developmental tasks that we have to master. So I just call them footholds. Just like when you're climbing the wall, for stability, you need to attach yourself. And once you're stable, then you can release and climb higher. That's the same thing with the ego. The ego attaches itself to certain beliefs. And when reality pushes you and you have to question those beliefs, then you can release some, and then you reach upward towards a new perspective that will help you understand, that gives you a higher vantage point. So when we work with stages, we are describing these footholds of development. So now I want to address the question where somebody said, what happens if you misdiagnose a person? So first, we don't diagnose. And secondly, you can't misdiagnose when you're really looking at footholds, because let's say I'm working with somebody, their center of gravity is level 5. But I notice that they are caught in this foothold, let's say at level 3, where they are, let's say in connection with I can take my own example. I have a 36-year-old daughter, and I am careful how I say what I say, because I don't want to offend her, because I know there are certain things that trigger her. Now, clearly I'm post-conventional, but that particular foothold of, coming across in a way that you want to please or have the other person's approval is a much earlier stage of development. So when you're looking at footholds, I may be at a later stage, but I might still be identified in connection with some relationships. I might still be coming from an earlier place. So I hope that example was helpful for you to see. And so what we do in our coaching is work with footholds and then bring appropriate tools and practices to support people to loosen their hold, to loosen their identity around certain assumptions and beliefs, so that they can be free to take on a more enlightened belief. The other thing I want to emphasize is that we really don't focus on center of gravity as much, though it's very useful to get the assessment and you get the center of gravity, but it's more useful to see the entire profile or the trajectory. And when you take the map, which is the assessment instrument, I will take a few minutes to talk about the map. You will get a spectrum. You will see that even though you have a center of gravity, your range of responses might actually come across 3 or 4 stages. So in coaching, we do this very simply. We take a tri-stage appreciation. So if I'm working with somebody, we look at what their current stage of development is, what are the footholds there, how do they automatically respond to life, what are some of the common things that happen at that stage that they are defined by. Then we look at what are some things at the earlier stage that they are still stuck in. Where is their, I like to say, foot nailed to the floor, where they can't seem to shake it. And where are they already flying a little bit higher? Where might they already see the world a little bit differently? So you can imagine, if I'm working with you as a client, it's easy for me to come up with a vertical development plan by identifying one thing you can work on from an earlier stage, one thing you can work on from your current stage that you can take into new areas, and one thing you can work on from the next stage that you're already familiar with, or something new that you can begin to practice. So this gives us a simple, crystallized, concrete way of working with somebody, and knowing that we are bringing the power of the research and the power of the lens to facilitate vertical development. doing that intentionally. So a lot of coaching does result in vertical development, whether you know it or not. I think it's way more powerful to know it consciously and to direct it consciously, and not, of course, overestimate the what this can do. But it's very, very useful and powerful to be able to use the framework. So now I want to connect it to polarities. Let me just check my time. Okay. So in the last webinar, we talked about tensions, and all of you got a sense of this dynamic interdependent pairs that we tend to privilege one over the other. We tend to say, this is better than that. And then we realize, no, they're both needed. So we can see the emergence of this wisdom, this maturity. We can see it in the stages of development. As individuals develop through stages, there are stage-specific polarities that they must navigate. And this is easy to see. And overall, you see the move. So if you remember the arc on the left side and the right side, overall, you see earlier on the left side, people have more either or thinking, either or ways of seeing the world, polarizing. And on the right side of the arc, you see that individuals are better able to depolarize and integrate and include and see the wisdom of both of those poles and begin to see interdependence and more of a systems complex view. That's why I think if you did nothing but worked with polarities and helped your clients manage polarities better, you would be helping them in developing vertically. And I really find this as not just another tool. It's a conceptual advantage, and it's building a conceptual thinking in a way that individuals can learn to deal with greater complexity. And here are some examples. So on the conventional end, if you just look at the left side, conventional ways of doing or behaving, more objective, more short-term, more quantitative, more focused on knowing. And as you step into post-conventional, you have to integrate not just objective, but subjective, not what's outside, but inside. Short-term thinking is no longer enough. You need to be thinking about long-term. You need to be thinking of unintended consequences. And quantitative is only looking at an external picture or something that is more measurable. What about intangibles? What about the qualitative? What about not just tasks, but relationships? And knowing is not enough. Questioning becomes more important. So you can see that these polarities are that at the conventional stages, you need to manage to be more integrated. And being integrated naturally results in later stage development. Now you can look at some post-conventional polarities. Now at the post-conventional stages also we struggle with tensions because you realize the importance of the system. Now you think working at the system level is better than focusing on the part until you realize you have to do both. You know, you want to transform yourself. Before this, you're only interested in improving yourself or meeting your goals, but now you want to transform yourself. And you realize that you're not appreciating yourself enough. You need to do both. And this is a big one. At post-conventional stages, there's a more interest in making connections and being more integral and being more inclusive. And then people forget or they neglect setting boundaries. And they have to set boundaries. And that's difficult because the fear is if I set boundaries, I'm actually isolating myself. And that's something I've been there, done that. I don't want to do that anymore. How many of you can relate to this piece? If you can. Setting boundaries is important, but we think it's bad because it means that you're separating, because we've learned that we shouldn't be seeing us as separate, especially those of us who are interested in more spiritual inquiry. And we're all about wisdom in post-conventional development, and we have to arrive at mystery. There's always enough that we are never going to know. We can never know. We have no idea, actually, what everything or anything is about. And there's this, it's a total mystery. So embracing the mystery then becomes more important at the post-conventional stages. So I hope this gives you a sense and a taste of how polarities relate to development. So the role, I've already mentioned this, the role of polarity wisdom is it can be a tool to shift from conventional to post-conventional development. And it's a tool at each stage to support integration, because you might have somebody at a post-conventional stage who's still struggling with a polarity that they simply haven't navigated. And it enables, I've already mentioned this, it enables the understanding of interdependence. And so it helps people do more systemic thinking. Last webinar, I showed you the AND book on polarities. I just want to highlight that this book has about more than 40 chapters on applications. There are a couple of chapters I've written and published in this, and one chapter is on vertical development and polarities. So if you're already thinking about this book, then you can get a little bit more detail. By each stage, what are some polarities that we see? And so just a couple of things about the map. So I told you that we can measure stages of development, and the instrument is called the map, which is the maturity profile. And this has, it's been researched since 1966. It's been proven and validated in terms of construct validity. The important thing I feel is that it has face validity. What does that mean? It means if you take the map and you come for your debrief and you're asked the question, does this feel like you? Is this where you would place yourself? Do you feel seen by the instrument? Can you relate to your profile? Then more than 98% of the people say yes. So that's called face validity. And let's say for the 2% or less that they say, no, this doesn't feel like me. Then we don't collude with the instrument. Then the instrument is less important than you. What is it that doesn't fit for you? And what is it that you didn't reveal? Or what made you be guarded so that you didn't actually express how you really see the world? So then that becomes the focus of the coaching. And how does the map measure development? MAP uses language to measure development. What does that mean? It means how you express yourself reveals how you see the world. So if you have a negative experience, you may want to control your emotions. So controlling emotions, that's language reflecting a way you understand what needs to be done. Another person might say, well, I need to digest this experience. That's already more neutral. Or I need to process it. Another person might say, I need to sit with it. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to feel about this. A big difference. There's a sense of time. There's a sense of process. There's an appreciation that more things are going to emerge internally in this experience. And it's very different from saying, I've got to control my anger. So I hope you can, so that's how language measures development. And the comments you get in the profile are tailored to the specific stage of the person and to specific issues of the unique person. And so what are the gifts of the map? Why is it important? It helps you to see your development path. Even if your clients don't take it, I think it's great for a coach to take the map, to appreciate what's next for you, to appreciate what's your fallback zone, and how will you work with others? How will you tailor your language to their capacity? How would you appreciate their journey? And how do you coach? Even coaches at different stages will coach differently. At level 4, a coach might be more interested in contracting and setting up goals. And at level 4, 5, or level 5, the coach may be more interested in a dialogue, maybe more interested in co-learning. Those are already 2 different stages of development. And so how can, this is the last piece, what does a maturity coach offer? So somebody who's trained in the leadership maturity framework and understands the stages and how to coach to stages, what do they offer the client? So if you're the client, this maturity coach can help you see how your approach, whatever your approach to life, how you react to different challenges you have, how that may be limited by your stage-related belief. How is it stage-related? The coach can identify what are the footholds that are operating, what are the polarities that are salient for you. The coach can use different tools and techniques based on your capacity. So for example, even with polarities, I'm not going to use the word polarity for somebody who's at an earlier stage. Even the word is a little complex. I might just work with their values and the upsides and the downsides, because now you know the map, and talk about their experience and what their fears are. I don't need to tell them about the interdependent nature of polarities because it's not necessary. But at a later stage, Somebody who has greater capacity, I'm working with them on polarities. I might even point out how paradoxical it is that they can do both in the very same instance. That's how I would tailor my coaching. Even my tool, I would tailor to stages of development. So a coach can show you how the language you use reflects a way of seeing. And they can help you practice with language itself then that can accommodate a larger view. The coach can reflect your fallback or your comfort zone, can support you in making subject object. That's a big move in development, is what was subject to me before, what was unconscious, what I didn't know is now object. Now I can see it, now I can do something with it. So a maturity coach can be a mirror for you to see your blind spots, to facilitate transition to what's next. And then to basically, fundamentally, I would say, to work with you to enable a more integrated development. And integrated development results in greater maturity. So those are some things that I think are very pointedly distinctive between leadership maturity coaching and what I might call regular coaching that doesn't look at stages of development as a frame to appreciate what's next for the client. And I will end with this, that holding the ethics of this measurement and the framework is the most important thing in terms of our foundation and how we approach the teaching, the measurement, and the coaching and the training. So it's really important that we don't privilege later stages of development. We respect every unique person for their unique journey and for the triumph of where they have arrived and what's next for them. And I would say the next layer is for every person to get a view, a meta view of this, the levels of development, so that they can support themselves and others. Yeah, so we have just a quick shout out to our program coming up that will train you in how to do stage related coaching without necessarily using the measurement. It's a 9-month program. And it starts in November. We have monthly workshops and you'll work in small pods. So you can go to mci.verticaldevelopment.com and get more information. We would love to hear from you. We do have some info webinars just to share a little bit more to give you a taste. So you're welcome to join those. And with that, we conclude at least an initial glimpse into this mysterious and wonderful process of how we mature into more and more evolved perspectives and how we hold the mystery of this life that is ultimately unknowable. Yeah, so we do have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I love that last photo you had up. That was beautiful. I did see Dr. Corver had her hand up earlier and she did put a question in chat. And if you're still here, I'm scanning to see you. You're welcome to take yourself off mute and ask your question. I believe it was how we can observe the automatic response. And then there was another question by Reed Melton around how this vertical development connects to Erickson's work around age development frameworks. And so those are 2 questions I saw. You can decide which one you.
Yeah, I can touch on both. So the first one was how can you read the language? Was that it?
I think it was more how you can see the automatic response, or how do you study the automatic response?
Yeah, so that refers to the MAP assessment, where it's a semi-projective assessment. So people just respond to open-ended, something that's open-ended, and something that's open-ended, just like the Rorschach test, where there's an image, you project your meaning. And when you project your meaning, it's an automatic meaning. So that's so when you take the assessment, and of course, when you're coaching, you're always looking for the automatic response. And this framework and the way we've been trained, it heightens our sensitivity to noticing, oh, look, right there, you just went into this part that believed this thing. And so in real time, you can notice how there's knee-jerk reactions, and then you work with that. In terms of Erikson's model, so Erikson was a developmentalist, and he could see how at different ages, there are different dilemmas. So there are two interesting things. Well, one is that research shows that this is not correlated with age. The stages are not correlated with age. What does that mean? And I'm sure this will reflect your own experience. I'm sure you've met people who are older and not very mature in your view. And I'm sure you've met people who are younger and way more mature. So it's not related to age. There are some broad things you could say that somebody who is older has had more experiences and has likely had more opportunities and more insights. They have more to offer. They generally see a much bigger, sort of a more rich tapestry. But the assessment and the measurement itself, the stages are not age related. The second thing is, it's very interesting. Erikson had the 8 dilemmas across the different ages, and he had the word versus in between, integrity versus despair. And when he was 82, he was in a conference, and this is really an amazing story, short story. He was in a conference, and Suzanne Kugreuter, my colleague, was in the conference with him. And he said, after decades of work in this, I realized it's not integrity versus despair, it's integrity and despair. You see the movement right there between versus and, not dividing it's this or that, but seeing it's this and that. And that is something that Erikson himself came into an understanding when he was 80. So I think that would be a good response to that question. Yeah, so I'm here. We have 2 more minutes for the group, and then I'm here for another 5-7 minutes if anybody wants to stay. And if you have any questions or you just want to share something, I would absolutely love to hear.
Yeah, there was one more question, actually a couple. Can you say a little bit about how stages relate to the Enneagram stages?
Yeah. So it's helpful. So the Enneagram is a helpful pattern recognition system. And again, you can imagine that you might have, let's say you have 9 people in front of you, and each one of them comes from a different Enneagram type, but you can imagine that they could all be at the same stage of development, sharing the same worldview, sharing the same beliefs about themselves, that and think about the feedback exercise, that yes, feedback is important for me to improve myself, but don't yet understand some aspects of the later stages. The converse is also true. You might have 5 people at different stages of development, but they're all Enneagram type 9, because they all have that natural inclination to respond in certain ways. So if you do both, you have more to offer your client. I tend to not spend so much time on typologies, even though I find them more fun, but I find it better to look at even the Enneagram types, to look at the polarities that underline each type. So if you look at type 8 has certain pole preferences. And for them to be more effective, they need to integrate whatever other pole that belongs to Enneagram type 3. They need to integrate that. So I find that way more powerful and juicy to work with polarities. And of course, I have clients who also know their Enneagram, and we do work with that. So I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Real quick, can you provide the link one more time? I'll put it in the chat. There's a few folks interested in learning more.
Yes, I'm actually going to put it right now in the chat box.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And while you're doing that, I just want to thank everybody for being here today and just for being such a rapt audience. I am going to stop the recording. It will be available on the Fielding website. We will also follow up with an email with a link to the evaluation link as well. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And Bina, on behalf of Fielding, so appreciative of your time and sharing your wisdom. And after I stop the recording, we can stay in the classroom another 5-10 minutes.
You're so welcome. And thank you again for inviting me.